And we're back again.
Hi.
Abby and Andy here with another episode. So today we are looking at Hypnotic, which came out today, the 27th of October 2021, via Netflix streaming services. So Hypnotic is an hour and 28 minutes long, and it is directed by Matt Angel and Suzanne Coote, who this is their second full feature film, along with previously doing the horror film Open House, starring 13 Reasons Why's Dylan Minnette, which they also co-wrote. They've got another third film currently in development called Sick.
Yeah.
Um, so should we just jump in with our thoughts? What did you think?
Yeah. I think it was a bit of a slow burner for me. There were a few points kind of in the first 35, 40 minutes where I just was wondering where it was going to go and how it was building up. So it's obviously kind of labeled as a horror movie, but I kind of wasn't really on the edge of my seat much at all. I think to be a thriller, yeah,
Yeah, because we went in blind, no trailers, nothing. I think to say psychological slash thriller on
yeah,
the adjacent of horror. Yeah, it's not no jump scares, but
no,
yeah, I guess certain issues in this film will hit harder to home than some others.
yeah, yeah.
Definitely a lot creepy. There's a creepy fella indeed.
I think as a thriller and the plot line, it works well. It has a nice idea to it, and I think overall, I think I did enjoy it, and I probably would watch it again. Um, but it is quite slow to get into what's happening.
Yeah, they give a lot away quite early on
Yeah, I mean, we kind of
with
knew what was,
who's the bad dude,
yeah,
who's the
less
baddie.
than an hour in. So we, at that point, kind of said to ourselves,
So yeah,
yeah, and then at that point, we kind of predicted that there was going to be a twist of some description, which, I mean, the twist we
kinda.
were looking for never really happened. Like, there was a bit right near the end where I thought that was kind of going to be it, and we had seen kind of that
Ah,
coming to the end of it, but you thought that there was going to be something else.
yeah, and we'll get into that bit. Yeah, it's just yeah. I mean, I would best describe it as something to watch. If you have a quite nothing planned, definitely give it a watch for sure. But it's not something. I mean, I don't know how the trailer is over it, so I don't know how hooked people were for it, or but it's not something that I would rush to watch, knowing how it plays out, or
Yeah.
just knowing the film in general. It's a good film for a quiet evening if you do nothing but otherwise. Yeah,
Like, I've definitely seen worse films, so I wouldn't. We're not really selling it, but it was
yeah,
for face value a
yeah,
good film.
yeah.
Yeah,
It was what you'd expect out of some of these sort of Netflix thrillers, like hits all the right beats, but doesn't do anything that stands out.
yeah.
Cool. So the first scene, we're introduced to a brown haired woman who we learn later her name is to be Andrea, who sort of runs in towards an elevator. She gets a call from
Yeah, so it opens with her calling a detective,
yeah
and she's clearly very distressed, talking about somebody watching her or following her. She's leaving the detective a message. It's clear she's at work really late, so then she's going home after work and makes her way to the elevator.
yeah. So then once she's in the elevator and she's sort of freaking out, she gets a call from an unknown number. She picks up the phone and
Assuming it's the detective.
yeah, she's like detective, and then we hear some words muttered, but we don't hear what they are. And then all of a sudden the phone hangs up. She starts freaking out even more.
Yeah, it's a phrase that clearly distresses her further.
Yeah. So then the elevator starts to close in on her, which eventually crushes her off screen. So as the elevator is closing, the screen is fading more and more to black.
Yeah,
So we don't see her crushed, but
that
yeah,
is what we
yeah,
assume
yeah.
happens to her.
Cool. So next scene, we're introduced to Jen, who is the main character of the film. So Jen is played by Kate Siegel. She starred in Hush as the main character, Maddie. She's in Gerald's Game, the Ouija film Origin of Evil, Oculus. She was also in both the TV series of The Haunted of Hill House and The Haunted of Bly Manor. So she's got very decent horror credits.
Mm-hmm.
And she's arriving at a house party which is being thrown by her best friends Gina and Scott Kelman, who are married. And then this is at this party we meet the bulk of the main cast. Um, so she arrives at the party clearly a little bit late, and she clearly has some issues and a drinking issue because she meets Gina outside, and she has a plant, and she's like, "Oh, I bought you a bottle of wine, but I drank all the wine, so I thought, oh, here's a plant. There's a dead plant." But Gina's not too fussed, and she sort of warns her that um, someone's there, and we learn this to be Brian, who's her ex fiance, and she's just like, "Oh, I need a drink then." So she's clearly an alcoholic. So we go into the party, and we meet Scott, Gina's husband. We see Brian from afar. He seems pretty nice, and then uh, she's introduced to Dr. Mead, and Dr. Mead is played by Jason O'Mara, and he's probably the second starring role in this film.
Mm-hmm.
He has over 70 film and credits, particularly in DC and Marvel Universe, with voice and acting credits. And then he also played Albert Wesker in Resident Evil Extinction.
So it gets further into the party. So Dr. Mead seems quite interested in Jen kind of from the get go, and Gina, her best friend, seems pretty convinced that she should go to therapy with him. Um, we thought that we would have seen a bit more animosity in between Brian and Jen, but that's not at all the vibe that we get. They sit down at a table, the four of them. So Jen, Brian, Gina, and Scott, just kind of talking about jobs and just life in general. To which Dr. Mead kind of comes over and interrupts the conversation to talk more about Jen and finding out what she does for a living. So it's at this point we find out that Brian and Jen are in similar um, careers, but Jen at the moment is unemployed, and they're in software development. It's kind of very awkward that Dr. Mead interrupts, whereas Jen seems still quite focused on Brian. And it's at this point we find out that he's got a sesame seed allergy. So he goes to eat something that Jen quite abruptly pulls away from him to check whether it's safe for him to eat, which it turns out it's not. So they kind of had a little conversation about that. The party kind of goes on for a bit, and then Jen's in the kitchen having some wine, and Dr. Mead comes in and drops his card on the counter for her and goes to leave.
So it then cuts to just after the party where Brian and Jen are sort of standing outside, and Jen's waiting for an Uber. So Brian offers to sort of take her home, but just before they have a bit of a moment where they're talking about their
Gives us a little insight to
yeah
their relationship.
sort of gives us an insight about their relationship, and clearly neither one is the bad guy in their relationship, but Brian eventually takes her home, and then we wake up. Well, Jen wakes up next morning, clearly at home in bed, where it's clear that someone else has been in her bed, and it skips to she's at lunch with Gina, where she informs her that she did sleep with Brian, but she has some regrets.
Yeah.
So then Gina convinces her to basically go to see Dr. Mead, see him as a therapist because she has some issues to work over with Brian.
Yeah. So Jen goes to the therapist goes to see the therapist, Dr. Mead. So arrives at the building, and looks like she's just, filling in some paperwork. And a lady comes out of the room having already just had a therapy session.
So her name is Tabby, I believe, but
Yeah.
it's never stated that her name is Tabby.
Yeah. And she talks about how Dr. Mead has worked wonders, and she has OCD, but it seems to be working really well for her. So Jen goes in. She's kind of very skeptical about the whole thing, and she gets underway with her session with Dr. Mead.
Yeah, so she talks mainly about um, how she met Brian. They both went to college together. How she thinks he's a good person, and after that they lived and worked together. They were both software developers. They went into that a little at the party. How they're both software developers, and Jen's obviously at work. But she had a which she initially said it was a miscarriage, but she was 6 months pregnant, so it ended up being a stillborn, and they both had named the baby Daniel, and she got 33 minutes with Daniel. But then afterwards, once the incident occurred, her and Brian just fell away, and their relationship deteriorated. So that's why they're on good terms. Like it was a tragedy in the relationship rather than one of those being the bad person in the relationship.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's clear that Jen is quite anxious and distressed while talking about this because she's constantly picking at her nails, which does become a bit of a theme throughout the film.
Yeah, so then Dr. Mead advises hypnotherapy, um, towards the title of the film, Hypnotic. Um, so
Which Jen isn't very comfortable with at first. She
no,
says she doesn't really like to relinquish the control that she has, so she's not very into doing this.
no, but Dr. Mead, he talks about how you know only Jen's the one that's in control of her subconscious. Um, no one else is, so she'll be fine. But after the first session, from which we see, he starts her off. It's very flashing images, and he tells her to go into a beautiful forest, which we see, and then just like that, her session's finished, to which has been an hour, and she says, "Wow, that felt like 3 minutes."
And she can't remember anything that
And
they discussed or anything that happened during the hypnosis.
where it to us, it only seemed like 10 seconds in the film, so you get the feeling straight away, just a bit of uneasiness. But that's her session up, and suddenly it's 3 months later, and she seems, I mean, she looks the business.
Yep, and she's got a job, and she seems to just be doing much better. She's doing yoga with her friend Gina at this point.
Yeah, and she's talking to Gina about how things are going, and she's been going. So she says she's been going once a week to see Dr. Mead, and she's continuing hypnotherapy. So it's all going well. Um, but then she then is in bed that night, and she starts having dreams of being in bed with Dr. Mead. Um, and they're
And
all
it's kind of appears as a memory as well. It's kind of confusing to the audience about whether maybe they are having this kind of affair whilst she's hypnotized and she's just not sure of what's happening. Because obviously the fact that he was at originally at Gina's party did kind of set off a few alarm bells for Jen. She did ask if it was normal for a therapist to be in contact with their client outside of office hours.
Yeah, and he was like, "Well, if I follow the rule about, I think he said 95% of the time, with a hint
Yeah.
of a wink, like, he's a bit casual and he's a bit suave. He's a good-looking bloke. His office is very modern and sleek. He does come across as a, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, like he looks a bit of a player, but he's got the money, he's got the looks, he's a, he knows what he's doing. So this is followed up by the next scene as well. So Jen's at a mall, and she sees a mother and son, and she gets upset, to the point she's not noticed where she's going to. She actually bumps into Dr. Mead, um, and he asks her how she is and how she's been, because actually it turns out that she hasn't been to recent sessions, but she says, this is just due to her being busy with getting the job and stuff. We're not too sure about this one because she does play it off as like slightly uncomfortable, but at the same time, the hypnotherapy has clearly worked, but there's a clear underlying uncomfortability issue. Um, but he asks her if they want to grab coffee, and she has time to grab a coffee with him, to sort of celebrate the new job, and she says yes.
Yeah, she seems quite happy to go for that. Um, so they sit down and have a coffee, and Jen is trying to find more out about Dr. Mead. So it's kind of asking more personal questions. So at this point, it's revealed that he had a wife that died, and he kind of plays off his life just generally as normal, like um, nothing massive happens apart from the death of his wife. But he talks about how traumas can shape lives in different ways. So either we can allow it to just become the only thing that defines us and it consumes us, or we can spin it into a more positive energy and rise above it and kind of conquer life in a different way.
Yeah, so this scene is it's very contrasting of the idea that we're getting from the therapy. Like she was a bit uneasy to say yes again to the coffee,
Yeah,
but then as Ab said, he opens up. But just before he opens up, it's very flirtatious comments. Like it looks more like they're on a date
yeah, and
than
he
just grabbing.
touches her face because he removes an eyelash. So it's the there's physical contact going on.
And yeah, of course, he opens up to her. So um, and then he talks.
And he seems very interested in Brian, so asking about how that's going. And Jen just says that she's avoiding him. So Dr. Mead kind of suggests heavily, he says that she doesn't have to do this, but he suggests that she invites Brian over for dinner to her house to talk about things, which she's not convinced at first, and then she just finally decided to do it.
Yeah, so Jen finds herself then outside a store in a store parking lot, and she receives a phone call from an unknown number. She picks it up, and we hear some sort of mumbling of words, although we don't get seem to hear it. And then all of a sudden, there's a black screen, and she's back at home, and sort of she's looking like she's coming out of her hypnotherapy, like she's in a dazed state, and she see her kind of coming
Yeah, the
round.
camera angles are it almost appears as though she's lying down at first before we see it move to see that she's sitting up at a dining room table.
And she's having clearly dinner's in front of her, but then she notices the plate opposite her where we obviously will know Brian should be, that there's a chair on the floor,
Yeah,
and we hear choking.
yeah. Jen is then kind of brought out of this kind of state, hypnotized state, and runs to find Brian, having choked on sesame oil or something, and she grabs his EpiPen and administers it before um, the scene cuts to the hospital.
Yeah, and so Brian has survived the incident, but he's been placed into a coma. um, and then Jen admits to Gina that she doesn't remember anything, only from what we saw. So what we saw is what actually happened from Jen's perspective. She was at the parking lot of the store before she even went in to buy the bits for dinner, and then next thing she knows, she's halfway through dinner and Brian is obviously in the bathroom choking. Um, so it then cuts to another session with Dr. Mead 8 days later from the incident, and Jen tells him how she feels that she was responsible due to the missing time, and the missing time is a constant theme in the film. Um, and she says that the missing time from that point is similar to the missing time in the hypnosis. To the point that Mead retells her that no, don't worry, only you are in control of your subconscious, and that it's not you. So he reasons that there's another reason for it, but it's not him and his methods or the hypnotherapy.
Yeah. Jen is seeing more dreams of her and Mead. It's more seductive, kissing on necks, and very provocative ideology going on here.
Yeah, so there's a lot of shots of different parts of her bodies, from her lips to his hands, and yeah, it's not all clear, but and when every time she wakes up from these dreams, she just looks bemused.
Mm.
But next, she's in her kitchen going through her things, and she finds a receipt from the store thing from the store when she bought.
There's something that kind of jogs her memory into finding this.
Yeah, and she finds the receipt, not knowing what she bought, and she does see in the receipt, so she bought sesame oil, And then at that point, she remembers she sort of remembers the scene, and she remembers that the person on the phone said, "Carry the fire," on the phone, and it does sound a bit like Dr. Mead's voice, but she's not too sure. So she does what any good person does, is she looks this person up on the internet, and as of course in films, if you look someone up on the internet, you get everything you want about them.
If only if it was that easy in real life. So she kind of has remembered the whole episode of Blackout. So she remembers the phone call. She remembers buying what she um, bought at the store. She remembers putting the sesame oil into the dinner. She remembers seeing Brian eat it. Um, so she then goes and has a conversation with her friend Gina after remembering all this stuff, and after researching into Dr. Mead, and she can see that there are some investigations going on into him. So it's at this point we learn about Andrea, and who she was. And it's also important to note at this point that Andrea and Jen look really similar. They've both got dark hair, similar facial features, and we see that she took out a restraining order on Dr. Mead before um, dying a few days later.
Yes, they said that she died by a heart attack. Obviously, we saw her being crushed, so at this point, as a viewer, you're going, "Wait, what's up?" Because if we saw her crushed, she would be found crushed. She would be destined to die as a heart attack.
Yeah, and that death does seem very out of place for the rest of the film that we've seen. So obviously we're a bit confused at that point about that death.
So Jen goes to Gina with all of this information.
And Gina is she doesn't really believe her at first.
No,
She just wants to see the good in Dr. Mead, so she's not convinced at all.
no. But despite that, Jen and Gina go to see basically Detective Wade Rollins, who's played by uh, Jude Hill,
Hmm.
and he was mentioned in a few previous reports, as we mentioned. Uh, so they go to talk to him about Andrea, and they open up with information about how Jen is on hypnotherapy and a few other details. So he's happy to open up about the case, and he tells her it's exactly similar to Jen's case, how she started hypnotherapy with Dr. Mead, and he shows us some excuse me, she shows us some CCTV footage from the elevator.
Yeah. So we can see it's the um, same series of events from the first um, scene, but it's in a different point of view, obviously from the CCTV. But we can see that the elevator is not coming in on her, but it is clear that she believes that's what's happening. And Detective Rawlins talks about how your body can go into a state of fear and shock, and the way that your body deals with that, sending your heart, um, it's not beating normally, and that your body isn't functioning properly. And if you stay in that state for too long, it can cause death.
No,
And
so he talks about how this is quite common in a lot of people, and when fear takes over, but it's not common for people to die from it. So obviously, um, Andrea from what we saw, is believed. She believes she's physically being crushed. So obviously something's going on here that's not. And like Ab said at the beginning, I think we're about 40 minutes into this point, and we know who's the creepy guy. We know who for sure, who to be looking out for. So we've got an idea of the film already. Um, so that's quite interesting. So the detective then talks about how he interviewed Mead after Andrea's death, and you might be able to tell me out here. So it gets a bit weird for me, but he talks about how he's unable to pursue Detective Mead, even though despite he had a warrant on him and everything, and he went through all his medical cases. He says because hypnotherapist victims can't usually be held up in court.
Yeah, they talk. He talks about how sometimes in criminal investigations, police officers use hypnosis to jog memories of witnesses, which are occasionally um, added into added into evidence. However, this isn't always the case, and when it comes from the victim side, it's very hard to um, justify what's going on and prove it is correct. So he said that it's usually laughed out of court. So I think it's probably a case of pointless resources going into something that's not going to end up in a conviction.
So the girls, they leave the police department and meet. Sorry, Detective Rollins tells them to that you can't do anything at the moment, but he'll dig into it further. But in the time being, get a new therapist. And it's as they're leaving, Gina tells Jen that she had actually, because Gina's a long time client of Dr. Mead, and that's why he was at the party, obviously. But she, as of last week, she'd done hypnotherapy for the first time. So there's some concern there. But they separate, and
They talk. She says that she was put under hypnotherapy because she was talking about Jen and the situation with Brian and how Jen blamed herself. So it's all kind of linking together as to why he might have put her under hypnotherapy.
yeah, so they separate, and just before the scene cuts, Jen sort of is looking around, sort of the feeling that she's being watched. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just the feeling of uneasiness around Mead is just there to see straight away from the film, or from going off from the film.
And I think at this point we're really thinking obviously he said something in order to um, make her poison Brian.
Yes. So Jen then goes to see Mead for another appointment, which um, shocked us. It's a weird thing. Detective said stay away, get a new therapist, and she had to see him, and she straight up says, she wants hypnotherapy because she's been a bit stressed and
But we can see that
anxious.
she has started to record the session on her
Yeah,
phone.
yeah. So she started to record the session on her phone, and she said she wants hypnotherapy due to anxiety, and even Mead's a bit like, okay,
Yeah, it's kind
yeah.
of we're wondering whether he's seen her, especially when she got the impression that she was being watched or followed at the police station. We're assuming that he obviously knows more than he's letting on to her.
So during this session, it goes back and forth between the session and the detective back, and he's looking up. He's found another former victim, or a former deceased lady who did
Client.
hypnotherapy. Um, yeah, under Dr. Mead, and he brings up a picture of her, Andrea, and Jen, and they all look identical.
Mm-hmm.
They all have very similar characteristics. Like they're all brunettes. They look all a lot very much alike.
Yeah.
So after this, the session is finished, and Jen's in the car park, and she plays the recording of the session, and includes her telling. She tells Doctor Mead up front what she's doing, and
While she's under.
yeah, this is while she's underneath the hypnotherapy. So she tells him what she's doing. She says she knows about Andrea. She says, and he's like, oh, so that's why he went to the police. So he knows they went to the police station, and he's clearly been following her. So um, it's all a bit, it's like dun dun dun. So he knows everything while she was under. So immediately she tries to call Gina to
Yeah, she's
warn.
very panicked at this time and she drives off. This is actually kind of where there was a little bit of tension built up while she was listening to the recording. I did wonder whether Dr. Mead was going to like appear at her car door or something, but that didn't happen. But Jen is very panicked. She's driving quite erratically to try and make her way back to um, Gina's house. So she gets a call from, she calls Gina, who answers while driving, and she's saying that she can't really talk on the phone because they're awaiting a phone call about a sale. And Jen is quite erratically trying to explain that Dr. Mead knows they went to the police station and she needs to go back to her house so that they can talk about it. And at this point, Gina receives another unknown phone call, obviously believes that it's from the sale, so hangs up on Jen to answer it. And it turns out, obviously, to be Dr. Mead. Um, she says how it's, not the best time because she's in the car with Scott, and he says a phrase that puts her into a hypnotic state. So he says, "This is how the world ends." And immediately Gina thinks that there is a tarantula climbing up her body.
So she becomes very erratic, and her driving is um, not not safe. And Scott is trying to calm her down because he can't see the tarantula, because there is no tarantula, and he can't calm her down in time, and she drives straight into oncoming traffic. Um, to point either a truck or
Yeah, a large semi hits
a large
them.
semi hits them, and they die on impact. Um, and Jen arrives to the scene. The police are already there, we're already blocking her off, and yeah, Gina and Scott are dead. It then cuts to Mead drinking scotch in his office or listening to some classical music, and Detective Rollins turns up, and he tells him about Gina's death, which Dr. Rollins, sorry, Dr. Mead acts all sort of shocked, but you can see it's a very, oh no, she's dead sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. There's not a lot of sympathy going on there. And Detective Rawlins talks about some of the other victims and how they all have kind of the same physical appearance, and there's clearly a pattern going on. Detective Rollins talks about how patterns are kind of his thing and why he got into the police, because he enjoys to see patterns in things. But he wonders why um, did Dr. Mead put Gina under his hypnosis when she didn't have the same physical features. So there must be a different reason behind that.
Yeah, because as we mentioned, Gina was, a client of this for some time, and she'd never done hypnotherapy, but all of Jen's, new client, and her first session she gets hypnotherapy, so something obviously changed for Gina, and as I was mentioned, it's about Gina had already said to Jen it was about she was talking about Jen and Brian, so
Yeah,
yeah.
and we know at this point that Andrea had claustrophobia, so had a fear of tight spaces, which was obviously what caused her death by feeling that she was in a really tight space getting smaller. And obviously, it was arachnophobia that Gina had, which contributed to her death as well.
So uh, Detective Rollins then leaves, and he collects. We see him take a spoon from the office, so he's taking prints, and he gets those run at the police station. I guess someone's running for him so he can find out. And then Roland then goes to visit Jen and informs him that the woman, um, the women that died, so like the likes of Andrew and such, died because they were asking questions. And as she's still alive, Roland still clean needs her, so he says keep low while he'll look into it further.
Yeah. Um, then,
There's a knock on the door,
yeah.
and she thinks it's Detective Rollins because it's only like 5 seconds later, so she's clearly he's
And
probably
there was a case file left in her house as well, so assuming that he was coming back to collect her. However, it's Dr. Mead who pushes his way in and tells,
he tells her to stop,
yeah,
which just and she then
and it has an immediate impact on her. Like, she's unable to move after that point.
yeah. So it's weird because with
We would assume
Andrea,
that he would have said the same phrase about the fire.
yeah, because with Andrea, Gina, and Jen is before, he had a code words, code phrases for them, but and we see this later. He uses words like sleep a bit later on, but simple words clearly also work with Jen. So it's a bit of it's not very consistent, but it's fine. Um, so he then says while she's in a state of comatose that she should he should be thanked,
Yeah, he's
and
gaslighting her.
he should she should trust him, and he's actually helping her. So everything he's doing is to help her. And quite frankly, his mannerism and the way he's talking is really creepy.
And it's like he's getting rid of everyone that has an impact on her life. So Brian was the first, and then Gina and Scott were standing in the way, and now he's going to go after Detective Rawlins.
So he leaves, but as he's leaving the door, he tells her to relax, and just like that, just similar to the dinner scene, uh, she's able to reawaken from her state.
So at this point, we're assuming that his wife is going to have the same physical appearance as the same women, and we were wondering whether maybe she didn't die under natural circumstances, just like it appears with the other women.
Yeah, we at this point we've had no information about Roland's wife except for what he said, and we know she passed, but we don't know how. So wondering what's going on
Yeah,
here.
there are mounting bodies that seem to drop around him.
Yeah. So Jen then tries to call Rawlins, but has no luck. He's not answering his phone. He's at home watching crime documentaries. He then hears some sort of noises, so he searches his apartment, which very classic horror trope. He's going, just down the hall. It's not a very big apartment, so he just searches a few bits and bobs. A bit like Saw with Detective Kerry's when she's sort of just searching like feels like she just lives in one room. Same for Adam actually in Saw One when he has a flashback of how he got caught. Um, but anyway, so he searches everywhere and he's fine. So he goes back to sitting down, which is a crime documentary. And at that point, we see someone crawling out from the bottom of I guess like a little wardrobe cabinet or
Yeah,
um,
like an under the sink type thing.
yeah, and then they said, and it turns out it's Tabby, the lady we saw at the beginning when
Jen had her
yeah.
first therapy session.
Anyway, she comes out with a knife and there's a struggle, and she's able to stab him, but he's able to, we believe, kill her. He sort of hits her over the head with like a wooden box, but she then hits her head again while she lands,
Yeah,
and she does look quite still. So we're not sure if he's just knocked her out or killed her, but he's likely killed her. But then it then cuts to him in the hospital with Jen. And at this point, I'm personally wondering why isn't the police all over like Dr. Mead's ass, because I know, like, all you have to do is there's so many links. He's already like, onto him about certain, deaths, and this is where I go back to saying I think it's a bit, maybe it's a bit stupid that they couldn't go after him in the past when there's links. But one of his, and Jen can atone for this. She can not atone. She can, she can be a witness to this. That another one of his clients, well, not another one of his clients, but one of his clients has just tried to kill him. A client that Rollins has never met,
yeah,
and Tabby, the OCD client, was very positive about Mead. When Jen turned up, so that's what I'm just wondering. I'm like, a cop's been stabbed here. Yes, you could just put it down to that patient, but this patient doesn't know him. What's the link? It's Mead, who obviously he's looking into.
yeah,
That's just me personally.
yeah. So they talk about how um, sometimes police use hypnotherapy to talk to witnesses who may need to remember something about a crime that they have seen. So Jen decides to go to a police validated hypnotherapist and talk about what have happened in the sessions with Dr. Mead. Um, Obviously, she is very distrustful at this point, so there's a bit of a conversation to make sure that she knows that she is in a safe place. When she is then put under, it's as though it's like she's being choked. She's grabbing for her neck while the hypnotherapist is desperately trying to wake her up. And we see the forest that we saw at the first session that she had.
And then it's quite clear that it's not so much like a forest; it's more of a wooded area just outside a huge house.
Mm.
Um, so in this house, we see the address of uh, 1010 Haven.
That belongs to a Sullivan. We are aware of a Sullivan because Dr. Mead talks about how that was his mentor's name, Xavier Sullivan.
He said that when they were having the coffee day, when he opened up a bit, he didn't go too much into detail. He just said that that's how we learned the practice and who we learned it from,
Yeah.
particularly the hypnotherapy.
So we see more romanticizing in this state of hypnosis. So we see Jen in a red dress. We see a bracelet being put on her
It looks like she's out for a romantic meal
with
Mead.
Dr. Mead, yeah.
Yeah, and then we even see Doctor Xavier in the house. Um, so he appears to be alive.
And different newspaper cuttings about how he's a part of helping with the CIA um, plant memories into witnesses' minds.
Yeah, so at this point we made another prediction that, is he trying to make is me trying to make Jen his new wife? We alluded to this a bit before, but it's quite clear now.
And
So
obviously, this is making us think. Obviously, these memories and such are being planted, because that's what it's talking about with Dr. Sullivan. That's something that can happen. So she's brought out of this state, and this hypnotherapist that works for the police talks to her about how um, he's clearly planted a lot of triggers in her mind, and it's quite difficult to um, kind of move past that. So she tries to plant like an anti trigger.
yeah, it's a sort of counter strike to what he's done, but we don't know what this is. So anyway, Jen looks up um, Dr. Sullivan and again film googling. She's able to find out everything about him. So we find out more about the clippings that we saw in her sort of dreams, and he was hired by the CIA to be part of MK Ultra, Project MK Ultra, which was basically mind control they called it, and they hired him, as Ab says, to create false memories in people. Um, so she calls Rollins and tells him that she's on her way to um, she's on her way to the house, and she tells him everything she found out. So he says, hold up, I'll come with you. And she says, no, don't worry about it. I'll see you soon. And, really, really stupid. So he is all annoyed and he takes off his hospital gear and goes to leave.
Catheter.
Yeah. So she gets to the house.
And when she was with the other hypnotherapist, she had written down the name Xavier Sullivan, the address, and also she wrote down what the date was. She asked the hypnotherapist what the date was, which at the time didn't really mean very much to us, but it does become relevant.
So yeah, Jen arrives at the house and she knocks on the door a couple of times and there's no answer. So she steps into the house, calls out for Dr. Sullivan a couple of times. No answer there either. So she starts looking around and she sees a picture on the side of Rollins and his wife, and she's wearing the red dress. And
Not Rawlins Mead.
sorry, Dr. Mead. She sees Dr. Mead and his wife. Um, she's wearing the same red dress that she's sort of dreaming about, and in the same restaurant. Um, so Mead arrives just behind her and says, "Yeah, that's my wife. Wasn't she beautiful?"
It's uncanny.
Yeah, um, but you're beautiful as well. And he explains that
Excuse me.
she explains that Dr. Xavier Sullivan was his father. Bless you again.
Excuse me.
And he passed away, so he left the house to his son. So he, as well as his mentor, he was his father.
I am your father.
So the scene then switches to Rollins, and he's leaving the hospital as we sort of he saw he was about to previously, and he's getting a call.
He was desperately trying to get hold of Jen, because when he finds out that he gets the fingerprints back from Dr. Mead, and it turns out that he is actually
He goes by Julian Sullivan.
yeah. So it clicks in Detective Rawlins' mind that obviously Jen has gone to a relative of Dr. Mead, aka Julian Sullivan.
So he he leaves in a taxi to go back to his place and to grab his gun and his car, and he calls for.
He receives a call from Jen, who has kind of awoken after being in a in her hypnotized state, which happens back at the lodge, and she kind of wakes up and thinks she's back in the office of Dr. Mead. So immediately rings Rawlins and tells him where she is. She's looking around for anything she can kind of use as a weapon. And then Dr. Mead comes in, after Rawlins telling Jen that he's got backup, and he's gonna obviously come and save her.
Yeah, so while we see the police units arrive at the building, they go up the stairs. Mead is telling Jin basically, um, you know, he knew from the minute he met her, she is his wife. Obviously not you know, physically, but like the way she talks, the way she walks, what she looks like, is the scent. Like it's really creepy. Like talking about her scent. He says there were others, and obviously he's referring to Andrea and the other women we know that died. But he said they just didn't make the cut. He calls her perfect, and then he then tells her to wake up, and it's revealed that actually she wasn't in the office at all. It was in her head, and
This is at the same time that SWAT breaks into the office and finds that no one's there.
yeah, so she was never at the office. She's in the bedroom. She's wearing the red dress, and she's like, "Where am I?" And he says, "You're home."
And he's painting her fingernails.
Um, so the only thing is that about this part is you weren't too happy about how, if she was in her subconscious, how did she phone Rollins and say,
Yeah.
"I'm at the office"?
Because when SWAT arrives, obviously no one has been there because they've just been at the house the whole time. But Rawlins is, he's gone back to his house. He's got his gun. He's on his way now to the house. So what? How did this phone call occur?
Yeah, because then it's like Rollins knows where, you know, that she's gone to the house in the first place because she called him back when, um, after she sort of found all the information about him, and then she remembered, and then when she, you know, finished her therapy session with the police therapist, so she'd called him saying, "I'm going to this house," and you know, he asked to wait, and she said no, so he knows where she's gone. It's a bit weird to go to the office, so it doesn't really match up. But anyway, Jen recognizes the bedroom that she's in from all her dreams, and Roland informs her that they're not dreams, they're memories, they're real memories from his life, of him and his wife. So all the seductive scenes, all those dreams of them two in the bed, it's all memories of him and his wife, which I called. So he's planted these memories into her head, and she calls him insane, which it clearly touches a nerve. And he claims that they share wounds, you know, the wounds that she suffered from Brian and Daniel, and the ones that he suffered from his wife, which he names it, calls her Amy. So we learn his wife's called Amy, and therefore they belong together.
Yeah.
So it was at this point she's tied up against the bed, and I think Abs, you thought she was sort of pretending the entire time.
Yeah, I was wondering if, she was, when he left the room, whether she was going to kind of jump up from her state that she can't move in. Because obviously we knew that the hypnotherapist gave her a counter trigger, but obviously we're not seeing that just yet.
No, it gets a bit very in and out of that situation, but she looks down.
This is where we're expecting a twist.
Yeah, so Jen looks down at her wrist, and she sees the bracelet um, that she's been put on her, and it's got the date of
March 8th.
March 8th, which is the same day, and um, it turns out that's the anniversary of Mead and his wife. So it's all aligned perfectly for Mead. And he goes to kiss her, but as he goes to kiss her, Detective Rollins turns up and bangs through the door, which just, you know, disturbs Mead, and he sort of takes off. And this now ensues a
He's
sort of,
making sure that Jen doesn't move, so he kind of pushes her hands back onto the bed as though she's not able to move them, which she isn't for the beginning of it.
no, so this part sort of ensues a bit of a cat and mouse sort of scene where, you know, Rollins is shouting for Jen, and Jen's like, "Oh, I'm in this room," but Mead has gone off. So, and Mead then turns off the light. So Rollins then starts sort of chasing Mead's shadows around the house and sort of shooting around.
And Jen's trying to come out of her hypnosis kind of with her own mind, trying to focus on the fact that she can free herself.
Yes. So as she's finally sort of able to sort of free herself, Mead attacks Rollins from behind, and they have a bit of a
Scuffle.
scuffle. At this point, I was sort of wondering where the police backup is. But so they have a bit of a scuffle, and Jen breaks free into the corridor, and Mead is on top of Rollins, attacking him, and Rollins says, "You know, my gun," which has been chucked to the side in the scuffle. So he implores her to get it and pick it up. Mead then tells her to sleep again, to which she does falls to the ground, but again, she sort of shows some restraint, and she's able to fight back, and she picks up the gun, and she shoots Mead uh, down.
Yeah, but she's still kind of clearly not being able to see brilliantly well. So she's kind of trying to fight the hypnotic state.
And she passes out. So she's awakened by Rollins and on a sofa, and Rollins comforts her and tells her that it's all okay now that Mead is gone, backup is on the way, and it'll be fine. And he hugs her, so it's all happy. And he says he says
And is expecting this not to be real.
yeah. I sort of called this part.
But I said it. I thought it was.
Yeah, absolutely was the happy ending we got, and I just sort of knew this. In fact, I saw this come in when she went to shoot. Um, so turns out that she actually shot Rollins, and it was reverse situation that Rollins was on top of Mead, beating Mead, and it was all in her head because Mead says he promises everything will be fine, my love.
But she thinks it's Rawlins saying it.
And obviously we know that Rollins would say about Mead, but this is where the second sort of little twist comes in.
So we know that the police validated hypnotherapist had obviously tried to find a trigger, an anti-trigger. So we see kind of the scene again where she was there, and the hypnotherapist says that that Jen's often referred to by Dr. Mead as my love. So if he says this, then everything else that's going on is discarded, and she's brought back to reality and sees things for what they are.
Yeah, so um, so she attacks him. She hits it, and tells him she's not his love. She hits him with like a wine bottle or something to that sort of shape. She runs off and she finds Rollins, who, of course, she's shot. So he's bleeding out, and he mutters to her multiple times his ankle to the point which she understands, and she grabs a gun which is by his ankle, and she's able to shoot me twice just as he approaches, and he falls down on a sort of chair slump dead. So she comforts Rollins as we hear police siren sound, and the camera zooms in on Mead, who is dead. So then we go to 1 month later, where Jen is working late in an office. She's on the phone, seems quite busy, but then she leaves.
She's got a new haircut.
She's got a new haircut. She's got a business suit on. Um, she then goes to the hospital where, Brian's still in a coma, and she's just catching up on about her life, where she's moving house into a better house. She apologizes that she left him and that she didn't share any grief about Daniel. She says that she blamed herself for the situation with Daniel, but she now knows that she shouldn't have blamed herself. But what she does blame herself for now is that they fell apart, and that he's got test results which are looking positive, and she'll be there for when he wakes up. So she seems to have fixed her inner demons with Brian, so that's all good. She then visits Rollins at the police department, where it's clear he's been promoted, and she thanks him, and they part ways. He gives her a gift, which she unwraps outside the station, and it's a CD of a sleep whale slash hypnosis sort of tape. Um, and yeah, the film ends.
Yeah.
Cool. Final thoughts?
Yeah, so I think overall I did enjoy it. I think it's got a good storyline that's mostly well executed. It works well as a thriller, psychological genre. So yeah, I did enjoy it.
Yeah, it's like I said earlier, it's sort of a bit of a bog standard thriller slash psychological film. We became very aware of Dr. Mead being the villain very early on.
Yeah,
The tone was there about the uncomfortability of him.
there could have been a bit of a bigger twist. I mean, I suppose the twist was also that he was related to Dr. Sullivan, but we didn't really, delve deep enough into that.
Yeah, I thought that it's a bit irrelevant to me, that part. It doesn't add anything to the plot. I mean, except for he inherits a big house, but he could have inherited that house anyway. If he was Dr. Sullivan's only friends, if he was
Yeah,
in
if we
this,
took that out, it wouldn't have really changed the
no.
plot of the film.
And the tone changed in the film, like like we said early on, like from the party and her first meditation, there was the clear line of uncomfortability, but then there was a positive side to it too. Like the flirting and stuff. And they could have maybe delved a bit more into that before, you know, having him out as so creepy straight away. And they could have. I think they could have rolled in a bit more with more detail about Mead's wife, about maybe how she died. Even the other three, like
Yeah,
why
because we were wondering at one point whether he actually killed her. But I think with the avenue they went by wanting
to replace her.
to replace her, it was clear that she did just to us
Yeah,
that she just died, and he was
yeah.
trying to
But even
recreate that relationship.
but maybe they could have gone through that even if she died like tragically, illness or something, or taken away from her. They could have delved into that a bit more, or even also I think the other three women like Andrew and such, like why it didn't work out with them, because he said they didn't make the cut. They wasn't perfect like him. Like why? Like Dr. Rollins claims it was because they were asking questions, but for me they could have just gone into more of that, sort of flesh that out. But overall, I enjoyed it. It was a good movie to